Be about an hour. We'll have some time for some questions. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Feel free to treat this more of a discussion, not necessarily a lecture. So if there's any points in here that you don't understand, you need clarification on, or you have a question about, feel free to just raise your hand and interject. We will have dinner after, as I said earlier, so please, I hope you're hungry. And I literally do have wine in my office if you want some. Yeah. For those who aren't too familiar with who I am, my name is Stan Cho, and I'm the broker and GM right here. This is our family business. My old man, literally old man, started this business about 40 years ago, and I took over the management reins 6 years ago. And the reason I decided to call in this meeting is essentially that I think we're in a bit of a mess right now. I mean, everybody is challenged with the affordability issues in Ontario, and there seems to be a lot of speculation going on out there. And I'm not talking about investment-wise, I'm talking about guessing as to why it's unaffordable. We've all heard the blame we put on foreign buyers. We've all heard the arguments that we're building too many condos. We're all looking for that easy answer as to why we're in this affordability crunch. Okay. So I want to clear up some of the big misconceptions today. I want to clear up some of the fact from fiction, and then I've put aside a good maybe 10 minutes to talk about the new fair housing plan. It'll probably go over 10 minutes, but if it does, we will probably have to book another session because there's so much to talk about under the umbrella of real estate, so we're only going to be able to get to a little bit of that today. So here are the topics we're going to talk about in this brief discussion. And like I said, it's not enough to really go into detail on any one of these topics, because on every single one of these questions we could spend an hour talking about it. First, we're going to talk about why is our market so hot? I think everybody realizes our market is on a pretty torrid pace at the moment. What is the underlying reason for that? And we'll touch on some of the points there. Are foreign buyers to blame? Do you guys think so?
They don't vote, so they are.
Okay. Yeah, in a way, yes. We'll talk about that. Is now the time to rent instead of buying? That's a question that we get a lot. And of course, aren't we building too many condos? Colloquially, we hear people say all the time, they're building too many condos, look at all the cranes in the sky. But are we? What do the stats say? Is the market going to crash soon? Just a quick survey. Who thinks it's going to crash soon?
They've been saying that for the last 15 years.
They sure have.
They say it all.
But are we there now? We'll examine that a little bit further. And of course, the Greenbelt has come into discussion because of our affordability crisis. Do we need to start building on the Greenbelt? And finally, what impact will the Fair Housing Plan have on our market? Is it going to help us? Is it going to help the renters as the Wynne government wanted? Is it going to help the affordability crunch as the Wynne government wanted? And we'll talk about why or why not. And then we'll have some room for discussion over dinner, of course. Any questions before we get into it? Okay, so some of this information on the first point. Why is our market so hot? We have to have a generic understanding of why our market is in this position before we get into specifics. And I believe we really do live in the best city in the world. We're all very blessed to be here. But we have to understand this in a larger context. And now we all know that this is the greatest country in the world. It is absolutely massive at 10 million square kilometers. But our density here, and that statistic, by the way, of 36 million as our population, that's the latest census information from 2016, so it's very up to date. But when you work it out in terms of our land mass, that's 3.6 people per every square kilometer. We are very sparsely populated, and you have a higher concentration of moose in some areas of our country than you do people. But the GGH is a totally different story. And the GGH stands for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and it starts over here. Peterborough, reaches around Orillia, comes back Waterloo, includes Niagara and Hamilton, and of course the Greater Toronto area. And when you're looking at that landmass in terms of size, It's tiny. It's 31,000 square kilometers, or 0.3% of the entire country's landmass. But here's the statistic that really is very telling. That tiny little landmass contains 26% of the entire country's population, or 9.25 million people, according to the latest census data. What does that mean in terms of density? Well, in the Greater Toronto Area, it means that we have 850 people per square kilometer. In the Toronto area itself, the city of Toronto, that's 2,650 people per square kilometer. To put that into perspective, that's New York City. We don't know this. We have a denser city right now than the Big Apple. Now, I'm talking not of Manhattan, I'm talking about the 5 boroughs of New York City. That includes, Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, but we are a very, very populous city, and the source for that is citymayors.com. We've been put on the world map, and it's hard because, sometimes you go away to an all-inclusive and you come back and people start telling you gained a lot of weight, but you didn't know it because you see yourself every day. Well, that's kind of happened in Toronto. I'm born and raised here, and you wake up and you think, this is Toronto, it's my home. You're not really paying attention to what's happening. But we've exploded. Toronto, we should all be very proud. We are the number 4 largest city in all of North America. Only behind Mexico City, New York City, and LA. Now we always seem to draw comparisons between Toronto and Vancouver's real estate markets. We've all heard that before, right? Toronto, Vancouver, well, they're the same thing, are they not? Well, not really, and at a very sort of high level, look, Vancouver's number 23 in North America. It's pretty much a small town compared to what we've got happening in the Toronto market, in the Toronto population. See, the government actually knew this, and they knew this for a very long time. And this is part of what's very frustrating when we look at the Fair Housing Plan. In 2006, the Ontario government introduced something called the Growth Plan because they knew that 2.4 million more people are moving here by 2036. To put that number in perspective, 2.4 million right now is the size of the entire Greater Vancouver area. So imagine Greater Vancouver picking up and moving here in the next 19 years. The other thing that the Places to Grow introduced was something called the Greenbelt. I think most people have heard of this. But the Greenbelt essentially said, no more development around here, which pretty much traps in the GTA. In fact, in some cases, such as York Region, it covers 50% of York Region and Durham Region. What does this effectively do? Well, you can't build on this, and you certainly can't build on the water yet. That makes us an island city. So imagine that 2.4 million that I talked about, well, that's being dumped right in here. The other part of the Greenbelt legislation that people don't realize is that it had very restrictive zoning changes. What do I mean by that? Well, inside this gray area where you can build, well, you can't actually build any more low-rise homes, such as a detached or a semi-detached, unless your land is already zoned for it. So in other words, I can't take this office space and say, you know what, I want to build my dream home on this thing, go to the city, the city's going to look at me and say, what are you, nuts? Okay? I might be able to convert this into high-density land, maybe I can get a condo approval on here, but I will never get low-rise zoning again. It's a finite product. I can actually take 10 detached homes and turn them into townhomes, but I cannot go the other way. Everybody understand that? That's had a profound effect on our real estate market. There's all sorts of effects that has had on our sort of general area in the general real estate market. Now, that discussion is something that we all really have to consider when we think about what's happening with our market, why it's so hot. This is a massive city that you are all living in now. We are no longer the Toronto from the 80s, where it was the largest city in Canada. We are on the world map. And it reminds me of a teenager sort of going through puberty, where you're not sure what they're going to do next. We're becoming an adult, and we have to accept that fact. So the market is adjusting to this, and our locals are adjusting to this in the way they know how, by saying, well, he's a good kid going through puberty, there's some growing pains there. But the fact is, this pubescent city is becoming a grown-up, and that's exactly what we're seeing on a broader scale in our market. Now, the question then turns to, well, I mean, one of the things that we blame are foreign buyers. And how many people have heard, and I think everybody's heard, foreign buyers are to blame for this real estate appreciation. Has anyone not heard that? Mm-hmm. Right. Foreign buyers are to blame for our problems here. Well, here are some statistics that many people don't know. And this is according to the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation over here. They say it's 3.9% of the market in 2016. Urban Nation, which is a independent think tank, says it's 5% of the market. And the Toronto Real Estate Board says it's 4.9% of the market. We all have heard that Vancouver is 15% of the market, and we have also heard the argument that these statistics are not correct. That's what the naysayers say. But the interesting part is there's no statistics from anybody who disagrees with this. People who say the number is higher have no evidence to show that it is. So we can work with what we have. And if we assume this to be true, even with a margin of error of a few percentage points, what does that mean in terms of transactions? And what that means in terms of transactions, according to Ipsos, if we take the high end of the market, 5% of transactions last year, that equates to 1,061 sales in 2016 for foreign transactions. Of that, Ipsos polled them and said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Foreign Buyer, what do you plan on doing with this property? Over half of them said, well, I'm going to live there. 25% of them said, I'm going to rent it back out to the market. Only 10% of that 1,061 said, you know what, I'm just going to leave it vacant. That means how many transactions? 10% of the 1,061. 106. 106 transactions, okay, in 2016 in the entire Greater Toronto Area accounted to vacant landlocking by foreign purchasers. What about the condos? What about share of units owned by non-residents in terms of condos? We can see that that ownership statistic is even lower, right? And Toronto is the highest, with 3.5%, but the entire GTA is looking at 2.3% foreign purchasers in 2016. Do you have any questions about this? Yes, Tuan.
How do you define foreign ownership?
Non-residents. Non-residents, simply, very simple. Yes?
Well, I want to go back to 2016. What about further?
Well, I think that the statistics we started keeping started in 2000, because the discussion became more commonplace towards the more recent years. Vancouver's statistics, I think, were up at 15% or something like that, according to the same sort of research that they did.
But it looks like foreign ownerships are buying, but then they become permanent residents.
And that's the other issue that I didn't put into a slide, but you know, Vancouver had a legitimate ghost housing issue. Mm-hmm. You don't see that in Toronto. You don't see that with the vacant properties that we have here. And we're going to talk a little bit about the rental market in a second, but it's certainly very different. Yes, Mona?
Actually, I read an interesting article about Berkshire Hathaway, this
Mm-hmm.
real estate company. He has actually asked them to specifically target Asian investors to move out of Canada and buy in the U.S. because they do help the economy. So even, I mean, you read all the stuff about foreigners coming in with illegal money and, you know, all the terms people are using, but every job in real estate begets a job in a restaurant, in, you know,
Absolutely.
in everything else. So, yeah, my concern is what will, you know, this do to the market, but because it's so small,
Yeah.
and it's, you know, fine, but the U.S., Warren Buffett, he's not a stupid man.
Yeah, I hear he's pretty smart. Yeah. No, it's a very valid point. What do we do? The other thing, real estate does not exist in a separate vacuum. We are all interconnected with employment, with economy. This is all related. So it's a very valid point, Mona. And the other point I want to mention, out of those 106 transactions, how many of those are luxury and homes? What are we squeezing out of the market? Yes, James.
Any statistics on foreign money? Because there could
I
be
wish.
people that have their money coming from.
I wish I
their
just had that
residence
foreign money, but yeah, I don't have any of the statistics on the foreign amounts coming in, but that would be a very interesting point, because I mean, I know there's a significant portion of this market. In fact, happy birthday Terry, welcome. In fact, the few transactions in this office that we've had from foreign purchasers have been homes over $4 million. That is not a common sector of the market. So effectively, what are we doing here? Are we squeezing that purchaser to say, you know what, go buy in the States? Because we're losing a lot more, like Mona said. That kind of money brings all sorts of spin-off activity into our market. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We're going to talk more about the foreign buyers as it relates to the sort of the Fair Housing Act in a second. Domestic investors, by the way, I want to point this out, according to Urban Nation, that is more prevalent. And I know there are domestic investors sitting in this room, because many of you have purchased with me, and I am a domestic investor myself. Well, we're 52% of the market. Okay, there is a far greater concentration of domestic investors, Canadian investors who are purchasing than foreign investors.
That's scalpers or speculators?
Well, no, these are investors who are actually. Oh, okay. I don't know about, you're right, Mona, maybe some of them are speculators, but I think the vast, at least the people that have purchased with me, and we've gone through our points of investing, I think it's for a long-term play into the market. It's a cash flow game. But we'll talk about these urban nations. The point in introducing this, just save it for our later discussion of the Fair Housing Plan, because really that Fair Housing Plan actually, it doesn't attack foreign purchase, it attacks us. It attacks Canadians, Ontarians, and it will hurt our economy. So here's another great question, buy or rent? Now, when we're going to have this discussion, I mean, it's a natural discussion, we've been hearing this for a long time, prices are getting so out of reach. Is it time now to say, I'm going to put that purchasing on hold, and I'm going to rent for a little while? And well, I use my friend from university, he's one of the smartest investment bankers you're ever going to meet. This guy, I showed him, I don't know, probably 50 homes for a period over 12 years, because he was convinced, and he showed me a lot of graphs and charts and formulas, and PowerPoint's his best friend. He showed me for 12 years why he believes the market is going to crash. He had a son 3 years ago, so he was actually convinced to finally buy a house because his wife made him, and that's the only reason he bought. Otherwise, he never would have gotten into the market. And he was convinced that renting was the way to go. So it's geniuses who also believe, and he's a genius, that renting is the way to go. But we need to have a further discussion about that. Now, I understand renting is a reality of life, and it's a necessity for some people. But if you're given the opportunity between renting and buying, and you have the means to do both, which is the better route to take? Let's look at some evidence. This is the GTA vacancy rate, and it's pretty disastrous when you think about it. In the blue, we've got purpose-built rental apartments. Does everybody know what a purpose-built rental is? For those who don't, you can look across the street here on Leslie towards the south end, and it's those ugly brown buildings with beige balconies. They're specifically built, I'm sorry, does anybody live in that building? They're not that bad. They're specifically built for rentals. And to give you an idea of that product, do you remember when the last rent control guidelines other than this time around were introduced?
1991?
Correct, 1991. Do you know what happened to purpose-built rental construction after 1991?
Stop.
It completely stopped. We built 1,100 purpose-built units, not buildings, units, up until 2013. That's something we're going to have to discuss later, because that had a disastrous result on the economy. And we're going to see it again. But, getting off topic a little bit, purpose-built rental apartments, their vacancy rate is down to 1.4%. The red line represents condos. Condos that many people in this room own. Well, that vacancy rate is down to 1%. And this is the GTA. I can tell you from the transactions that cross my desk at this office, it is far less than 1% in some areas of the city. We do not understand the crisis we have for rental product in many areas of this city. Lisa, I know you live in Liberty Village. There are 5-6 contracts within an hour of a listing going live in that area, and that is usually gone by the end of the day. We have a crisis in terms of rental products, so that 1% is very misleading. Well, how does that compare to the rest of the country? This is the latest stats from the CMHC. I know it's not that current from 2015. Kitchener's at 2.9, London's at 3.8, Niagara's at 3.1, Peterborough's at 4%, Sudbury at 4.6, Thunder Bay at 4.7, and Windsor at 4.9. Worldwide, San Francisco's at 3.8%. Los Angeles is 2.7%. Chicago's at 5.2%. Mexico City's at 5.1%. But surely Manhattan must be better. It must be just as bad as us, right? They're at 3.1%. Manhattan is the renting mecca of the world, as far as we know, according to Sex and the City and all those other wonderful shows. But we are at 1%. We have a much worse vacancy rate than the Big Apple. This is a problem. And it's evidenced right here. And this is the statistics that I wonder if our government has had a chance to examine, because this tells a very clear picture of what's happening in our rental market. Our transactions are down. Okay, they're down 14%. We had 9,545 of them in the most recent quarter reported, fourth quarter of 2016. Well, okay, if transactions are down and prices stay the same, that just means our interest is falling, therefore prices should fall, but they are not. Prices are increasing at a torrid pace. And they are increasing to the tune of 12% for bachelors, 7.4% for a one-bedroom, 8% for a two-bedroom, and a whopping 15.9% for three bedrooms. And I'll explain why that's happening in a second. But when we look at the numbers, I'll tell you what the provincial government did. They looked at one half of this equation. They looked at the escalating rents, and they immediately made the conclusion, well, these landlords are jerks. That's not the whole story. We have a completely plummeting inventory of rentals in addition to these prices. There's two sides to this story, and we'll re-examine this point in a little bit. But to the renters out there, this is the climate that you will be entering. And you think that the sales end is competitive? Boy, oh boy, you have no idea. The rent end, and Asif, I'm sure you can attest to this, the rent end, many people in the room can, is way more competitive. Come on in, Monica.
Does Airbnb make a big difference on that?
Well, that's a great question. It's funny you say that, James, because now looking at my particular investments, I'm thinking, hey, maybe Airbnb is the way to go. There's no rent control on my Airbnb, right? But sorry, does anybody, Alex, do you have an Airbnb?
Oh no, it was just something we were discussing about the properties that we'll be getting is like, if, with Airbnb, I mean, if you manage it, let's just say have renters coming in every 1 to 2 weeks, can you potentially like do better? I mean, you have to actively manage it, of course. It requires more effort, but in the long run, can you collect more than just having like one tenant?
And that's a fantastic point, and it's very relevant to our discussion about the Fair Housing Plan, because think about this now, as a landlord. If you are subject to that new rent control, a cap of 2.5% every single year, would it make more sense, and in terms of profitability and sustainability, if I'm going Airbnb, what are we doing then? Forgetting the profit for us, we're taking another rental unit out of the pool for renters. So we are contributing to the downfall of that availability, and that in turn is going to raise the prices from other people. Yes, Mona?
Sadly, I think, I've been a renter most of my life, and now I am a landlord. And I think this is going to make the price of rentals go up.
I agree with you.
I have fabulous tenants, but personally now, as much as I love my tenants, I would love for them not to renew their lease. I'm not going to do Airbnb because it's too much work and I don't like that. But a rental out as furnished units, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, I'll take it off the market.
You're absolutely right.
There's nothing fair about this. We've literally, as landlords, been put to play hockey with our hands tied and our skates unlaced.
Right. And it's very obviously to look good to the masses who are complaining about the affordability crisis, but it is not thought out at all. And we have many landlords in here who will echo the same sentiment. It makes you consider taking that out of the rental pool. And that will only make this affordability crisis worse. We actually had a very damaging week for tenants this week. Very damaging. And there are other considerations we'll discuss a little bit later, but that's one of them. So Alex, yeah, thank you for that idea. I might Airbnb my properties for now. By the way, I will, to those who email me, I will send you a PDF copy of all of these slides, so you don't, take your notes, absolutely, but I will send you a copy of this, so you can check the information yourself. There is other reasons for the rent market that we have to consider. That, you know, I don't really have the slides here, but I will show you. Remember to, and I'm going to show you some stats on this in a bit. High-rise living is a fact. We'll talk about in a second, but we have other considerations now that are going to further tighten that rental supply. We are in big trouble. Tenants are in huge trouble. So the question of whether you rent or buy, one bit of advice. If you decide that you want to get into this competitive market of rentals, get in there now. Because this problem is going to get a lot worse down the road. Okay? We'll talk about the buying end in a little bit, and it relates to this discussion. Are we building too many condos in Toronto? No. Okay, next slide then. Yeah. Well, you know what's funny? For the most part, I'm going to say absolutely not. And I'm going to show you some of the reasons why. But at the very end, I will caution you that there is something to be concerned about with this. Understanding what's happening from a historical point of view, this is a snapshot of our market from 2004. And you'll notice that high-rise sales made up 32% of our entire market. And low-rise sales made up 68% of our entire resale market. Any guesses what happened 10 years later? It flip-flopped. 10 years later, in 2014, we had high-rise representing 55% of all sales in the market, and low-rise representing 45% of all sales in the market. I called Altus Group, another think tank, last week for the latest statistics on this, and they just gave me the answer, Stan, we're so busy right now with this fair housing bombshell, I can't give you the latest stats. It has shifted further, but we don't have the graphs to give you at this point. So I'll touch base with them, but this skewed sort of graph, well, it will continue to get more and more imbalanced as we move in the future. Remember, in the very first sort of opening question, I said we have to accept that Toronto is now a world-class city. Well, when you look to other cities around the world, you will very clearly see that this sort of imbalance is way bigger than ours. So we are headed further and further down that route. Toronto real estate, ooh, before I show you, does anybody know what the average detached house price, please realtors don't answer, because I know you all know this. What is the average detached home price in the 416 only, not the GTA, Toronto only, at the period ending March 2017?
1.5.
Oh, should get your license. 1.561780. Okay, $1,561,780. Do you know how much you need to make to afford that mortgage? Ask.
20% less now.
Well, I think there's all sorts of considerations when you're up at that snack bracket, if I'm not mistaken. You can't just do a straight 20%, right? No. So if you have questions about that, and you would like to know, Asif is here, and he'll be more than happy to let you know the affordability it will take to own a house that size. Yes, ma'am?
Why do we in Toronto think that that is a big problem around the world?
It's not.
Most people, unless you're incredibly wealthy, or unless if you're very poor and living in villages, do not live in a house. It's called a villa if you live in it. So why do we in Toronto want to keep ingraining as we're growing that it is everyone's God-given right to live in either a 4,000 square foot detached home or in a condo in Queen West, and with a concierge and still work part-time and have a quality of life. I mean, it's normal in London, in Paris,
absolutely.
In Cairo, in Hong Kong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Detached homes. I don't see that as a problem, honestly.
I think the only answer I have to that is we're growing. You said it. We're growing. We're teenagers right now, going through puberty, and we're confused. But it is a reality we will have to accept down the road. There's no question, and it's coming. This is very normal. Okay. And that's very normal because we talked about the Greenbelt earlier, and I showed you the map and the restrictive zoning. That's what naturally happens to our remaining inventory. Economics 101, of course, as the inventory goes down and the demand goes up, your prices are going to go up. Okay? Mystery solved on that one. That's why detached prices have done that. And hello, I'm just going to give a news flash for this. Despite what happens to our market, you're never going to see Toronto homes ever under $1 million again. Ever. Ever. Okay? Regardless of what happens to this market. Ever. You can quote me on that. I don't have a crystal ball, but you can quote me on that. This graph, sort of, I've cut it. It's cut off here at the 2016 mark, and it misses And that was not at the end of the 2016 period. This was in the Globe and Mail, basically reporting to the end of 2015. And I'm purposely showing you an incomplete picture. Okay? And I'm showing you an incomplete picture. Many of you have known me since for a while, but in 2009 I wrote an article for our publication up until about that point saying this price gap is not normal. Everybody should invest into low-rise housing right now, because as our population is growing, that is the first sector of our market that is going to take off. Nobody remembers when you're right, they always remember when you're wrong, but I have it in writing, so if anyone wants to see it. But sure enough, it went up, it skyrocketed, but an interesting thing happened. This wasn't supposed to be so flat. The gray line is condo growth. It wasn't supposed to stay like that, but it stayed as flat as an ironing board. In fact, the average appreciation over a 5-year period averaged out at 0%. But I showed you what's happening to our population. I showed you with the restrictive zoning. I showed you the fact that we essentially have no choice but to build up. And obviously that has, you know when you take an elastic band and you stretch it really far and it goes the other way? Well, that's what's happened. It's gone to the other way and in a very aggressive manner. That detached home is 1.56. Even after that aggressive growth, the 416 condo still sits at 550,000. There is no wonder why people are starting to say, hey honey, I love Yonge and Eglinton, but I'm not going to be able to make that $1.5 million work. Do you want to move to Georgetown, or do you want to consider a condo here? That's happening. Before our very eyes, that's happening. This statistic, memorize and realize that this is a reality of our life. Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation knows that we have 100,000 newcomers coming here every single year. Mathematically, that creates a need for 34,000 new households every single year. Never mind the need in our internal growing infrastructure. Okay? Put that statistic on the side. Just remember that stat. Toronto Real Estate Board loves to use different shades of pink for this, but let me explain to you. That 1% is bachelors, 1 bedroom, 1 plus den, 2 bedroom, 2 plus den, and 3 bedroom. These are all resale transactions for the period ending in the 4th quarter of 2016 for condos only. And what that tells you is that 1%, 21%, 24%, what does that add to? 45? 46%. 46% of the market is 1 plus den and smaller. 54% is 2 bedroom and larger. That happened for the first time in 2016, where there was a higher percentage of 2 bedroom sales than 1 bedroom sales. Never happened before. Actually, for the period ending 3rd quarter, it was slightly more skewed. It was 56% to 44%. So it's kind of balanced out a little bit. But I think the reason for that is the very next slide. Who knows an 18 to 34-year-old? Who is an 18 to 34-year-old? To the question to those who are 18, and some of you are lying, I know you are not. I'm not going to point you out. To those who put up their, if you 18 to 34, if you